one of the reasons it became so popular so fast is that traditionally advertising space on New Year's Eve, actually on New Year's Day after midnight, is very cheap because everyone stops watching after the ball drops and they all go home, they find their Ubers. They quit watching TV because the ball dropped. But on New Year's Eve 1999, New Year's Day 2000, everyone thought planes were going to start falling out of the sky because of Y2K. So everyone started flipping channels. And what they saw was that we had bought up all the advertising space, and they all saw our very first duck ad running on basically all the channels at midnight and thereabouts on New Year's Eve 1999. So anyway, I'm not going to take up any more time. I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Beverly Wright. Because we have a panel here today, she's going to do more of the introductions. But thank you for coming. So I'm going to give this to Dr. Beverly Wright, and she will let you know what we're going to talk about today with AI and how these guys are solving some real problems in society using data science and artificial intelligence. So here you go.
Hey guys, welcome. Thanks for joining our panel. Really, this is more like a fireside chat, but I didn't bring marshmallows or graham crackers or chocolate. I have vegan marshmallows and vegan chocolate that I brought because I'm vegan, but I was planning to give it to them, but this doesn't feel very fireside chatty. But please know this is more of a conversation than it is an actual panel. So I'm actually a little out of my element because I'm used to the structured panel. But we're going to have a nice chat. So we're going to start with introductions on our AI for Good panel. I'm Dr. Beverly Wright. I've been in data science when it was called decision sciences for 29 years. I have a three-legged stool of experience. I spent 16 years in academia. I have any former students in the room? Okay, good. I was really a hard professor. I was told I was way too hard. So 16 years, most recently at Georgia Tech, teaching master's and doctoral students in analytical methods. I've also served as a practitioner working for Southern Company, Cox Communications, and Truist, formerly SunTrust Bank. And about 12 years in consulting, which is where I am now. I work for a really hippie, cool company headquartered in the Bay Area, California, called RelationalAI. And in addition to that, I have a couple of other roles. I'm a TAG board member, so I run TAG Data Talk, which is our podcast. Please check it out. I'm also the founder and kind of operating officer, if you want to call it that, for a nonprofit called Athletics, which is the main reason why I'm here, and I'm an academic director for University of Georgia with their data science programs and through executive education. Cool. And we're super, super excited to have John Rich with us. I'll let him introduce himself.
Hi, so I have a lot less credentials, and I do a lot less than what Beverly just outlined there. My name's John Rich. I'm the VP of FutureX Labs at Moxie. And what we do is we focus on tracking emerging technologies. We try to identify the technologies that we think are going to have the biggest impact in the world and on our clients' industries in the next 2 to 5 years. We bring those technologies into the lab and we build prototypes using them. So one of the things that we say is that it's impossible for a client to understand or to buy something that they can't see how it can affect their brands or their businesses in some way. Often we'll combine technologies. So things like mixed reality, we'll combine that with some form of machine learning to create enhanced, say, VR training scenarios, as an example. So in our lab, we've done experiments with everything from brain-machine interfaces to genetic editing, but I would say the biggest areas we focus on are AI-related and extended reality technologies.
Thank you. Hi everyone. My name is Blake Fleischer. My background is, I was actually trained as academically trained as a chemist. Then went from there into high-performance computing. So I worked at Georgia Tech's high-performance computing group for a number of years, and then joined kind of more formally the what we call now as data science. So you call it decision sciences. I would call it scientific computing. It has gone by many different names over the years. So from there, worked in manufacturing for a couple of years. Did some forecasting and actually inside of mills, so it's a very interesting place to collect and measure data. And then now I work for Gallup, so maybe you are familiar with the Gallup World Poll. Gallup has a data science group there as well that's solving a number of different problems that affect cross-industry.
just as a point of clarification, I would love to call it data arts and sciences, or decision arts and sciences, but I can't seem to get that going. That would be awesome. Okay, so a couple of points of clarification, and there is no confidence monitor, so that's why I'm sort of looking here too. First of all, what do we mean by AI? Because this is called AI for good. And so what do we even mean by that? Please note that for this particular discussion, we're referring to AI just as a general this data science type of work. So this could be anything from simple descriptive types of data science, or analytics, and all the way up to optimization, or the use of artificial intelligence that's emulating human behaviors. So AI, we're speaking very broadly. And then as far as for good, we're not talking about like how is this going to help company X make a bunch of money, as much as we're talking about how can this help the human condition. So how is this helping humanity? So this could be improvements in, you'll see some examples in a second, but improvements in world health, improvements in some of our afflictions that we deal with, like reducing things like opioid addiction, understanding homelessness and domestic abuse, and so some of sort of dark topics in some ways, but how do we do something about those? So that's what we mean by AI, and that's what we mean by for good, just to kind of level set. Okay, I hate having to turn around here, but I will survive. All right, so the first part we already did the introductions. Secondly, how does AI for good work? And can you guys give us a sense of, when we talk about AI for good, like there's got to be some kind of process. Is it very similar to what you would see in a data science process? Is it a little bit different? Just paint us a picture of what AI for good might look like.
Yeah, so I'll use an example I think that we're all very familiar right now, and hopefully I'll get more down into that specific process point. But right now, I'm not sure if you're aware of it, but on December 30th, a privately created AI system identified the coronavirus outbreak. This was almost a week before the CDC, and this was 9 days before the World Health Organization had identified that this outbreak was happening. This is a company called Blue Dot based in Canada. It is a private company that has millions of dollars in funding. Now, I don't know the details of this because the site doesn't specify who their clients are, but this information is you need to pay for it. So they say they're set up for health organizations, for hospital systems, for government-controlled health processes, but let's pretend for a moment you control a multi-billion-dollar hedge fund, which I sometimes imagine I do, but I don't. You are paying them for this information. You now know almost a week ahead before almost anyone in the world that there's a potential pandemic outbreak happening. Your clients, your investments in the energy sector, the global supply chain, this could allow you to save or even make billions of dollars by having this insight. Your incentive, however, is not to notify people who could maybe avoid getting sick or passing on the virus. Your incentive is to make potentially a lot of money. So when we talk about, as Beverly talked about, AI for good, I want to say I believe that AI is the most powerful technology we've ever created in history, and I think it can do extraordinary good. It depends on what the incentives are and who applies it and how. And therefore, as we develop our prototypes and we show them to clients, often our prototypes are designed around business use cases, again, profit incentive. However, more and more, business and brands need to stand for their brand principles over their products and their services. And therefore, you could think even small investments, and many companies are doing this in different ways, can make a big potential impact for good for all, if not many, by having these investments. I think Beverly's going to talk about maybe some of these projects in more detail. So I just wanted to do that higher level framework of how I think about this technology and the importance of how we apply it to data sciences.
Awesome, really good example. I think the way I think about this is kind of two different ways. So, and I love to put on my Birkenstocks and shout about open source. So when we think about the products and the things that we create, there's a lot of really good models around how do you create, say for example, a software product. So when we think about AI, right? We think about what's the kind of main conduit, and computation's kind of a big deal there, right? And that's sort of what's kind of driven a lot of the recent advances. And so a lot of that's going to be sort of driven around software, right? Because that's kind of how largely we interact with computation. And then from there, we think about the things we build within there. And so if you're not familiar with open source, or you're not familiar with kind of what that looks like, it's basically largely a legal document that was written back in the early 80s that kind of specifies whatever somebody builds or writes has to be free. And if you build something on top of that, that also has to be free and available. And so, there's a lot of really good ways to sort of integrate with a business model where you're also outputting open source materials. The other kind of main way I think about this is in terms of the action that we put out, or the time that we put in. And so, there's lots of different ways where we can literally invest time as someone who would not necessarily open it more broadly. Like, say, for example, you're working with, and so I've been recently coached that it's not homeless, it's folks who are living on the streets. I'm not Mercedes-less. So, we think about, how we have things. So when working with folks who are living on the streets, like, maybe that's not something that's going to be totally broad, or it's not going to be on the internet for everyone to see, but that's also time that we invest in something and try to build something and have a product or some kind of actionable insight at the end of the day. And so kind of those sort of two are the ones that I'm most familiar with.
Great point. So I think the idea of the notion behind it's not necessarily what you're doing, but it's how you're doing it, why you're doing it, is an important one. Also, you talked about like aligning your brand to your principles, John. I think that's really interesting. So, for example, wasn't it CVS that recently stopped selling cigarettes? Like, they're talking about health and how important health is, and then they sell cigarettes. And so I think they stopped selling cigarettes for that reason. And think of all the money they lost when they stopped doing that. But they did it because I think it aligns with their principles. So it's not that you can't make money when you do data science for good. You're still doing it for a benefit to the community and things like that. But it can or cannot potentially make the money. So that's a good point of distinction. Let's see our next question. This is a little awkward with my slides here. Okay, so in the past, we've sort of focused data science around doing things like understanding markets. How do I get more customers? How do I build products that are more in alignment or that are very profitable? And so is this really just a different application? Is this sort of lifting and shifting from, hey, I'm going to do the same kind of thing, but I'm just doing it with different types of business problems? Or is there something unique that makes this especially important? Assuming that it is important. What do you guys think?
So I personally think, as I probably alluded to earlier, that it's incredibly important how these decisions are made. And I think sometimes there can be positive benefits still with the profit motive, and then sometimes it could go into a very dark space. So I'll give you an example of that. I was at CES this year, and there's a company there. Right now, obesity is a massive issue in the United States. It has incredible economic and personal effects on many people's lives. This organization was designed to partner with companies like mine, Publicis as an example. They would try to partner with them. It would then give them the technology to measure every part of your body mass index, down to the level to know exactly your muscle tone, the amount of fat in each segment of your body. So if you agreed to this as an employee of the company, they would give you all this feedback, and then they'd give you coaching and plans to change your diet, increase your activity, as an example. The way they were pitching it to the businesses is that obese employees cost companies globally trillions of dollars. Because if you're obese, you miss more days of work. This creates a cascade effect. You need replacement people to fill your position. So on the one hand, you've got this potential positive thing of improving people's health. On the other hand, we're going to have our reviews at Moxie soon. And I'm terrified of the day where I go into my boss and he says, you didn't make your 10,000 steps and your body mass index is off by 0.2 degrees, therefore I can't give you that promotion. And if we think this is a strange thing, in 27 states in the United States, it's actually legal to not hire someone if they smoke. And I believe it was UPS, no, I mean it's U-Haul, has decided they will no longer hire anybody who smokes. So imagine this point where the biometric data that's coming off our watches somehow gets to our employers or to our insurance companies, and you could see, yes, there can be these positive things to improve our health, but there could also be this, I sound like I'm creating an episode of Black Mirror right now, but there could be a downside. I guess what I want to just end with is I think this is incredibly important in terms of how we control our data and the privacy around it and the implications of what those outcomes are.
Really, really good points. I think, so I always like to think about in terms of what's transparent. So I'm just going to kind of build on that for half a second. And I think everyone in this room is in a unique position because you're either in a position of authority or you're about to be. In one form or another. And so when it comes to technology, when it comes to data, when it comes to what's done with that information. And so, you know, it's definitely worth, just the fact that every single person's in this room, that we're all having that kind of thought process of what is important and what are we going to do with the information that we have. So I always love to reference Catherine O'Neill. She's written this book called Weapons of Math Destruction. She's got a number of TED Talks. She's just kind of a general badass. But she is really kind of leading the way in sort of stating when we create, for example, algorithms that are deciding something, hire, no hire decision, a lot of HR type of automated decision making, to be transparent about it, right? So we're making these decisions. Why are we making these decisions? And what went into that? Because they go wrong, right? So that's definitely one area. I think when we think about importance, the way that I approach that is think about job satisfaction, think about satisfaction in life. So for me, being trained as a scientist, physical scientist, there's kind of this idea that you contribute to the body of knowledge, and that gives you some sense of immortality, right? That you've added something that fundamentally stands even after you're gone. And I think when we think about the things that we've spent our life doing, there's kind of this moment of, okay, so what have I added? Obviously it's important to be able to pay the bills, but also, how do you think beyond that? And I think one of the points that you touched on, John, is that, and I'm going to kind of paraphrase this a little bit, is life in Venn diagrams. So what is the overlapping pieces between profit and your personal satisfaction, your altruism, right? And so thinking about that, I think, is really where the sky becomes a limit. And so as you kind of go through the areas that you work in, everyone has kind of an area of expertise. And the question is, how, if you're interested in this and you're trying to think about, okay, where do I begin? What's the Venn diagram of your expertise with an area of need that's not necessarily profit driven? And so it can be, right, but it doesn't have to be. Because Venn diagrams can overlap at any degree. And so I think that's the question, one of the questions to walk away with from today is if you're interested in this area, what's the unique skills that you bring, and how do you overlap those in such a way that you feel that you've made, at least for me at least, that I feel I've made some contribution that I can walk away with.
Very cool. So I'm going to give you a couple other examples about why I think it's super important. I'm looking down the barrel of 51. I expect gifts from everybody in 9 days. And there was a point in my career, I think, when, I've been in the same field for a long time because I really love it. I'm embarrassed to say that in some ways because some people have changed around and done all these different things. I'm very narrow focused. I love data science. I always have. I like extracting insights from data that are not easily seen. I just think it's cool. And I think when I was in North Carolina, that was like, 9 years ago, I started trying to reach out to companies. Is anybody from Eastern North Carolina, by the way? Like East Carolina University, go Pirates. That part of the country, there's not a lot of businesses. There's East Carolina, and there's a hospital that's owned by East Carolina. And because there were not a lot of businesses, when I was teaching at ECU, I was teaching market research and analysis. That's back when I had more patience and I could teach undergrads. And I didn't have businesses to work with. I've always been applied and believed in real data, real problems, real clients, all that stuff. So because I couldn't find any, I went to this place called the Service Learning Center at East Carolina University, and I think that kind of changed my life. So at the Service Learning Center, we started working with a lot of local nonprofits in the area. And it could be like an organization that, especially ECU was like a major party school. So there was an organization that like gave out condoms, that's all they did. And there were other kinds of organizations that were, art driven or focused on health or try to help people that were living on the streets or whatever. And I started doing projects with my students. They would collect data and analyze it for these nonprofits. And I started seeing that they could do what they do better with us. So we didn't have a direct impact, but we absolutely had an indirect impact. I was like, okay, this is kind of cool. So for 3 years in a row of my 5 years at ECU, I won the Surere Society Award, and I modified my class to make it a service learning class, which was fantastic for the students because they had to do a service learning anyway. And normally it was something where they had to do using labor, and these were not labor kind of students. So it worked out well to be able to use their professional skills. So that's kind of where it started. And when we flowed over into analytics, one of the reasons I did that was because my students were coming to me after they graduated, and they would say, all that cool stuff you taught us, I'm not doing it at my current company. I want to do some cool stuff. And I said, well, go find a nonprofit and ask them for their data and help them understand their business questions. So that's exactly what they started to do. And that's what you can do, by the way. You don't need a platform, but if you want a platform, well, I'm right here. It's called Analytics. But they did it without a platform, and they were able to do all kinds of fun analysis that satisfied their data science itch, while at the same time benefiting these organizations. And where I'm going with this is to give you a couple of examples. That's sort of the journey to get to the point where we have accomplished a number of projects. If you've been a part of Analytics at some point, can you raise your hand? Okay, so great. That's awesome. We have definitely some people in the room. Through the 1,400 people on the meetup and volunteers that we have and the incredible leadership team that we have, we've accomplished projects on mental health. So we did 7 projects on mental health. 4 of the team leads had PhDs. So we have really high caliber. Blake is part of Analytics. He has a PhD, super smart, very experienced. We're able to help the DeKalb Community Service Board understand things like what's the right medication dosage? How do you better manage your emergency care? What's the date of vulnerability for someone that's receiving care for suicide prevention? Right? I mean, understanding these type of things and helping them do what they do better is, I can make all the money in the world for, the Home Depot, Coca-Cola, Delta, like you name it, our for-profit clients, but it's not nearly as satisfying, and I feel like it doesn't benefit the community the way, of course it does benefit the community. Money is how we make the world go around a lot of times, but the real benefit I think career-wise and professionally and as well as personally comes from being able to help organizations do what they do, help them, help people, help save lives, help communities, help happiness in some ways, but not just quality of life, but life period. So when we talk about importance, I would encourage you to seek, you kind of said that, look for your own importance, find it in yourself, what drives you, where is your passion? And I hope that you'll find it by giving back. Okay, sorry, I got on a soapbox there for a minute. Oh yes, and there was one more point I was going to make about that, which is that oftentimes people will ask me, I have 8 mentees. I have no idea why people want me to be their mentor. But I have 8 mentees right now, and sometimes if they're recently graduated, they'll ask me, I have a hard time figuring out where I want to go. And so I'll tell them, imagine that you're on stage and you're about to introduce yourself. What do you want to say? How do you want to portray yourself? In 5 years, what do you want to be able to say about yourself? And then someone that's more experienced, this is a little bit morbid, but I'll tell them the same kind of analogy, and I'll say, what would you want people to say at your funeral? Do you want people to say oh man, she made companies a bunch of money, it was really cool? Or, how do you want, and maybe that's what you want, maybe that's your life. But for AI for good, the amount of impact that you can make, like John was saying, this is a very powerful technology, maybe the most powerful that we'll ever see. Certainly the most powerful, I think, that we've ever seen. So if we can use it for good, then I think that's a win all the way around. Okay, so Beverly Wright told you to think about what you want people to say at your funeral. Oh boy, how do we know that we're being effective? Like, there's lots of stuff that we can just kind of, throw out there, we can try to do, but how does effectiveness in the community, social good kind of space manifest itself? What does it look like?
Yeah, we were talking earlier. There's an organization, Joey Womack. I don't know if any of you know him. He runs in Atlanta, and he has a project called the Intentionally Good Project. And what it does is he works with startups that have a social good initiative, and they work to support them in developing minimum viable products, helping them with finance, coaching. And I believe all of the organizations they're working with are for profit, but they are also for social good. And many of them, almost the two primary ingredients for any kind of new initiative is based upon, computation is evolving exponentially, so it's that combination of computation being able to process this extraordinary data that, we talked a little bit about this earlier, and I believe this is true. I've researched it as best I can. But sometimes you guys may have heard this media headline. It happens every couple of years, and it'll say all of the data ever created in human history was created in the last 2 years. So that's always a kind of an interesting headline, and it's kind of mind-blowing to think that only 90% of all data ever created since the beginning of Homo sapiens was in the last 24 months. But what's the crazy thing is this appears to have been happening for the last 20 years, for 2 decades. And that's what they don't say, or maybe it's way down in the article some way. So what this means is that A, there was already too much data that a human being could effectively gain insight and have a positive impact in the world. We have to rely on machine intelligence in various forms to turn this data into actionable insights. The great news, though, in terms of the importance of it is probably, I've given you some examples, and others have been talked about here, about how important it is for who gets hired, who gets bail, and who stays in jail. These have already having a massive effects on our society. What you see in your social media feeds, these are all algorithms, right? So you could be in this tribal echo chamber because, you mentioned this, Blake, Facebook doesn't show the black box of their algorithms of why you see what you see and when you see it. So the importance of this, I don't know how to, if I can overstate it, I think this really does affect our entire future and what kind of future we want to live in. So that's why I think we just really need to focus on this topic of data.
So I get to make fun of you a little bit. So we all know Facebook, Cambridge Analytica, they have some black marks. They also have open source software. So this is where I get to kind of say there's actually good opportunity. So they have a great forecasting package called FB Profit. Maybe some of you have heard of it, maybe some of you used it. But there are opportunities to kind of look at the gamut, right? And I think it kind of speaks to the diversity of individuals that work at a company.
Microsoft does have. There are many corporations now that are making open source their algorithms.
So yes, absolutely. Some no, right? Because that's kind of the proprietary nature of the work. But absolutely. I think when we think about effectiveness, right? And I'm going to kind of tie this to the folks in the room here. So when we want to make things effective, and we're delivering some type of project or product, we think about things like key performance indicators, right? Like these things that we track over time, adoption, that kind of thing. And we want to pick those carefully, right? Because if we drive an entire project towards the wrong KPI, we'll drive it right into the ground. But I think the main things on top of that I feel kind of go into making these types of projects effective is thinking about, one, being persistent, right? So if you're doing a day job and it's what you do and you're good at it and you go home at the end of the day, a lot of times that's when you would go do the similar thing again for another 3 or 4 hours when you're volunteering, right? And so that's, I think, one of the reasons why a lot of volunteer models are come, show up, whether it's building a house or serving soup or whatever it happens to be, it's like really different kind of from the day job that you have. And so I think that's one of the things that's a little bit different when you're thinking about how do I do a social good sort of more in the AI space. So persistence is a big deal because without completing anything, it's actually really difficult to put that out as something that's actually accomplishing something. The other thing that I would recommend is find a partner, an expert in the field, right? That could be partnering with a nonprofit, that could be somebody else you're working with who is also passionate about it, but find a partner much like you would find a workout buddy. And then the final piece I would say is, as you go along, collect deliverables. So whether that's, I've created a software piece and it's shared and it's on the web and everyone can access it, right? This is really useful for some of the folks who are building their careers, right? These are things that you put on a resume. My first data science job I got was because, it was two main things. One of it was an open source contribution that I made to Scikit-Learn. And the other one was the fact that I had been part of a nonprofit that did data science for social good called AnyData. And so as you collect these deliverables, they're sort of a mark of what you've been able to accomplish. They're useful for selfish purposes because they help drive your career forward, but they also are kind of the way that I look at my personal KPIs for what I'm outputting.
Great, and that's a great lead-in into my last question before we do like a final piece of advice. And I think you sort of answered it, Blake, so I'll give it to John. But what would you consider to be your recommendations? Like you talked about having a partner, finding a way, what would be your recommendations for the audience that wants to do more AI for good?
Yeah, I think there's never been a better time, depending on how experienced you are, the way that data science is advancing because of new forms of computation. Quantum computers are a good example of that. This exponential increase in data. This is a really rapidly changing area. But the good news is there is more access to more information, online courses that are free about new techniques and new technologies to very low cost. Access to training data sets, do your own experiments if that's what you're into. So I guess my real advice is if you're interested in this space or even just want to gain more literacy around what is possible with data intelligence work, it's completely accessible to everyone basically online at this point. And I guess that would be my first step, particularly for new emerging areas.
So I would say there's a couple things, right? So this is kind of more general, right? And I think of it like it's okay to be bad at something if you just don't give up, right? Like everything I've ever been good at was because I was kind of loggerheaded and didn't give up. I think the other piece is to make that decision to be good at something. Those kind of go together, right? It's okay to be bad at something if you keep working at it and then make that conscious decision, okay, I'm going to try to get better at that. And that's a really good way to kind of build skills as you go along in the social good space, which is a big thing that I found really beneficial. And I think the other thing too is to find the Venn diagram, right, between what you do at your day job that can benefit more broadly. And so maybe that's, as you learn something, you create some kind of output and you slowly start to either build a website or some type of repository of information that you can share with others. And then find out what those ways are in that Venn diagram where what you do in your day job can overlap with something for good. And so I think that takes a little bit of conscious sort of thought, maybe some introspection, to kind of see where those overlaps are. And that's, I mean, really the sky's the limit. So it's as creative as every one of us is.
Great advice. So I was at Warner Media. This is Shashank. I always say it wrong. This is Shashank over here, and he runs our advocacy team for Athletics. And we get requests all the time, fortunately, from different companies to come in and talk about data science for good. And we got a request from Warner Media, and that one they asked for me specifically. So I went and talked to them, and I had all these slides ready, and I was like, okay, I'm going to talk all about how you get involved and what to do and my recommendations. And they said, oh, no slides. So I had to sort of make something up on the fly. And here's what I said. I call it the 3 Ps, right? So my recommendation for you is, number 1, find a posse. Find a posse. And this goes to what Blake was talking about in that don't go it alone, you know? Like try to find a posse. If that's just one person, if that's a couple people, find someone or someone's that will help you through your journey of AI for good. The second thing I told him was find a purpose. And really I want to call that a passion. But find something that you're adamant about that's for good. Whether that's environment and you're helping, you know, there's tons of data about the environment and about air quality and stuff that we can do. There's other kinds of things like maybe you have a passion for orphans or you have a passion for, you know, reducing domestic violence. But find your purpose, find your passion, find something that makes you tick. And don't just say like, well, I'll do whatever as long as it's for good. I want you to, maybe that works initially, but we're going to be asking, you know, you're going to be asking a lot of yourself. Like try to find something that really gets to your core and that helps define who you are. And then the third thing is find a platform. Find some sort of way. Don't have to reinvent the wheel. Like look for different types of ways, whether that's through athletics, whether you jump into a competition that is for good, whether you partner with your local school. And there's all kinds of professors that reach out to athletics all the time, or there's ways that you can definitely do something. And you kind of said it nicely, John, but John said there's no excuse. There's all sorts of things that are available. There's all kinds of ways that you can, you know, learn more, you can find out more, you can do more. So I would say those are the 3 Ps. Find your posse, find your passion, and find a platform. And that will help you on your journey for AI for good. We'll take questions now. I think we have just about 4 minutes for questions, so we can only get a couple. And I kind of have rules for my questions. Ask a question of the panel, not a specific person. And make sure your question is actually a question, not just a comment. I don't know if there's a mic. I'll repeat it. Go ahead. Yes, there's a meetup under the same name. So if you go to the meetup, the next meeting is March the 10th, and that's the best way to get information on that.
Oh, I was just going to also say, I mentioned that Intentionally Good Project, they're looking for business coaches for these socially good startups. So even if you didn't have a specific skill in, say, data intelligence, you could have other skills that could support those initiatives that, again, underlying it, there'll be a lot of data science going on.
Awesome. So I'm going to take a data perspective on that. There's an organization called DataKind that does that. There's an organization called Code for America and a Code for Atlanta, where folks bring social projects and you can join, and you do not have to be a data or a code person to participate. And there's also Kaggle that has Code for Good. Just 3 examples.
I think Informs, I serve on the board of Informs, and Informs has a platform as well. So there's lots of stuff you can do locally. There's athletics, but DataKind is kind of the national model that we try to follow. Yes, sir.
I think with AI, we need to put AI interest very important, but usually we got the right side, top side, and we put the top side, we need to put the UBI in AI. We come to UBI.
Universal basic income?
What's the question?
Can you repeat the
Yeah.
question?
You were saying that AI has this potential for either bad outcomes, dark outcomes, or very, very good outcomes, and then specifically about universal basic income. You might be familiar, but let me just recap it real quickly. Some people think that AI, because we already have AI that is better than humans in many narrow domains, i.e. being a radiologist as an example, that in the very near future, that this time might be different, this is a different technology, and that there may not be enough human jobs left to run our society the way we currently do it based upon us earning our income by doing our jobs. Therefore, there's this idea of universal basic income. There was a Democratic presidential candidate, Andrew Yang. That was his core platform. He is no longer running at the moment. But UBI has been tested around the world. There have been experiments done in the United States, in Canada, Finland, many countries. So the idea could be, the one way to think about this is we could be at this very dark juncture where we have to fundamentally change our society because there aren't enough human jobs left. Some people believe that the technology will create new jobs, nothing to worry about. The other side to that people believe is because we are making these exponential advancements with machine intelligence, artificial intelligence, and robotics, we live in a time, we're approaching a time of abundance where everything we need, all our basic needs, could be met by these machines. And therefore, if we just share this abundance in some sort of distribution model, we won't need this current job sort of structure. So that would be the maybe more utopian version where we all just get money for being here on the planet, meets all our basic needs, and then in our free time, we dedicate it to the things we're passionate about and that we care about.
Did you want to comment on that? Or?
Oh, no, sorry.
Just a quick note, there's an AI and how it will impact the future workforce event coming up. I'll post it on my LinkedIn, so if you guys want to check my LinkedIn, I'll post it in like 10 minutes. Okay. I think we have time for one more question, or are we done?
Go ahead.
Okay, yes.
All right, so we're in the healthcare industry, and we have a massive amount of data, but there are obviously constraints on how we can use that data. And so one of the active discussions that we're trying to have with our customers and other companies we work with is because we could, sometimes we always can, but do you know of any groups or, I'll say think tanks that can help with navigating that ethically? Because there's a lot of good that we can do, it's just there's not a common expertise around how to navigate HIPAA and other regulatory constraints.
Yeah, the ethics question is a huge one, and actually I'm a part of the Emory University Center for Center for Ethics group under, what's his name, Paul Root Wolpe. And that's one of the challenges that we have, which is how do we even figure out what we're trying to figure out? Like, who do we even put on this board? And a lot of us we're data scientists, and we come from a background of, data or engineering or something like that, and we don't even know who to talk to yet. Like, are these sociologists? Are these theologians? Like, we're not even sure. So I don't have an easy answer for you. There are some standards. I don't know if you guys are familiar with them, but there are some national standards that are coming around. I'd have to look those up before I started quoting them. But definitely no easy answer that I know of. Certainly it's a huge conversation point right now. I think it's one of our areas, honestly, that we're sort of falling behind. Like, we're advancing our technology and our tools and our capabilities in AI, but at what cost? Are we really keeping up with the ethical side of it? I don't know that we are.
I just would have one thing to add, and I don't think it answers your specific question because you have that existing data, but you're restricted right now. There is a company called Universal Basic Data Income, UBDI. It works with a second group that basically encrypts your data and makes it anonymous. So what this system does is allow you to give them all kinds of your data, whatever you want, your social media data, your banking account data, your DNA, your biome data. And then medical organizations that want to do virtual drug tests or try to develop new drugs, they use your unidentified DNA data. So again, sorry, it doesn't help maybe you in your specific case, but as an individual, we can go up and sign into this program, and we could donate literally our DNA in terms of making health improvements through the system. Oh, and they pay you for it. So we kind of cut out the middlemen of Facebook and YouTube that basically are reselling your attention and your data, and we directly sell it to the end person that's trying to utilize it, in this case for good.
Yes, I don't have any think tanks for you, but I can make some general recommendations of the way that I would think about it. I don't know if that's terribly helpful for you, but so I recently changed positions from Georgia Pacific to Gallup. And I got this thing in the mail that says, if you do not get your physical, we will charge you per month, every month, into perpetuity for your health care. And so I think one of the things that helps is what would you want applied to yourself, and how can you make that transparent? Kind of tying back into that sort of a little bit about weapons of mass destruction. I think we are faced with a lot of challenges. One of the big ones that I see is foreign governments' influence over the media that we see as we go into an election year, right? That's another good example. I think that's one thing that we can all kind of relate to when we think about elections and we think about for good. So the other one, and this may not be very helpful, but I always like to think, ask your grandma, what would she want? They do have some wisdom.
Thank you guys so much. Really appreciate it. Please connect with the three of us on LinkedIn.